sons and daughters.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Aurora Smedley podcast, where I speak with you about what the world needs to hear. And in today's episode, I'm going to be discussing how I use Chat GPT as my therapist. And I know that this has been an area of contention. I know that there are a lot of people that are advocating for it, other people that are saying that ChatGPT is bad, that we should not be giving our data or depending on ChatGPT for emotional support. And I'm going to just share my experience using ChatGPT essentially as my therapist for about 10 months now. So I'm going to share the advantages, the disadvantages, the ways that I've found to make it the most helpful. I have frankly found it to be extremely useful, very helpful. It has helped me be able to process a lot of things and be able to move through a lot of different triggers. So I am just going to be very transparent with you all. And I know that this is going to be a juicy topic and supportive for you as you look for tools to support you and your emotional well-being. So before I jump into this topic, I'm going to bring out that big fat disclaimer, and that is that, hey, I'm not pretending to be a mental health professional. I am not advocating for the use of this. I'm simply providing this information from my own experience in the hope that it may be supportive for you in your journey. So thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to start off by just sharing some of my own background with mental health and also with clinical therapy in order to share with you where I'm coming from with regards to mental health. So I experienced severe depression for about 4 years. I felt suicidal for a large portion of that time. This was from 2016 to 2020, roughly. And so during that time, I went to a number of different therapists and have texted suicide hotlines, for instance. And I found that for the most part, these resources were not supportive for me. They were not effective. The therapists that I went to did not help me resolve my issues. I was not finding that, for example, the suicide hotline was supportive. It just felt like I was talking to a robot. And so I ended up essentially self-treating for severe depression. And I found that the things that were most effective for me were chiropractic work, acupuncture, long periods of time in the wilderness, as well as therapeutic psychedelics. And none of this was what other people were really promoting. And I do want to also point out that in our society currently, with regards to mental health, a lot of the dialogue around, for example, therapy or with Chat GPT or with psychedelics, a lot of the dialogue is around whether these approaches are moral rather than whether these approaches are effective. And so I personally, because of my own experience, I lean towards what is actually useful rather than what is quote unquote moral, what is going to make me look like a good person, what is going to make me look like an upstanding member of society. Because I do feel that there is a narrative in our society right now that if you go to therapy, this means that you're a responsible person. If you go to therapy, it means that you are an upstanding citizen, an upstanding adult. And while this may be true for many people, for me, it certainly was not true. It did not move the needle in my own happiness. And so I looked for other alternatives. And so one of these alternatives that I want to share with you is today's topic, which is using ChatGPT as a way to internally shift our emotional and psychological world. The way that I got into using ChatGPT for this purpose was that I had a friend or two suggest this idea and say that they were using it in that way. And so I decided to give it a shot, just to experiment, just to see how it was. And what I found was that it was actually extremely effective. And at this point, I've had dozens of conversations with ChatGPT about personal issues. And I have found that in the vast majority of the time, I'd say like 90% of the time, it does provide extremely effective and useful insights that allow me to be able to shift whatever I'm struggling with. So I'm going to go over how I use it. And before I get into that, I would like to point out a few contentious aspects of using ChatGPT. I've noticed that there's 2 to 3 primary concerns with using ChatGPT as your therapist. The first is privacy, right? So we know that there are some maybe ways that somebody else can potentially put in a prompt that pulls up information from what you said, because what you're telling ChatGPT becomes the training material for ChatGPT. Right. And I know that they've kind of installed some precautions in there in order to reduce the effect of this, but this is a concern for a lot of people. So for me personally, the way that I deal with this is that I basically have the understanding that it's viable, that there's some aspects, some traces of the things that I share with ChatGPT that are going to be out there on the interweb. So for the most part, I don't mind if there's just certain personal things that I'm talking about. Like if I'm talking about my boy problems, if I'm talking about I'm frustrated with somebody or whatever, then I do not care that much if somebody knows about my boy problems. But on the other hand, if there's something that is more sensitive, that I feel more cautious about that information being associated with my identity, then I will either open up a private chat in ChatGPT, which does not save the information and does not use the information as training information for ChatGPT, or I will open a separate browser window and put it into ChatGPT directly without using my login. And these are the 2 ways that I use ChatGPT if I want to have a higher level of protection as far as the data that I'm inputting to ChatGPT. And, while I can't claim that any of this is perfect, this is simply the solution that I have found in the case that I'm sharing something that is a little bit more sensitive. The second concern that I hear often with ChatGPT is more one of emotional safety, or the individual's personal safety if they are using AI as some kind of emotional support animal, right? And this is that if we use ChatGPT with this purpose, then it could encourage us to do self-harming acts, or it could become something that we become reliant on with our emotional dependency. And I know there was one circumstance where somebody ended their life because of what an AI told them. I'm not sure if it was ChatGPT, but it may have been a different AI. And so this is a legitimate concern. And I think that regarding this concern, first of all, you need to be conscientious of when you're chatting with AI. And then secondly, we also need to be conscientious of whether our children or adolescents are interacting with AI, because they are more malleable than us adults are. And I will add to this point as well that OpenAI has been called to attention about this and has adjusted its algorithms in order to shift this. But I'm also going to bring up a counter argument to this as well. And this is that Sometimes we can have interactions with actual human beings, other humans, other people, that would also cause us to want to engage in self-harm. And so because of this, we need to be conscientious as individuals that there are many factors that could influence us to want to hurt ourselves. And it's not just an AI, and it could be another human. It could be our interactions with other humans that could put us at risk. So I think that we as individuals just have to be conscientious of whatever we are interacting with, be it a person, be it a machine, be it AI, right? We need to have our own self-awareness in place as far as protecting ourselves and protecting our well-being from whatever entity that we're speaking with. The third concern that I've heard in relation to using AI as a emotional or psychological support tool is that we might become reliant on our relationship with AI instead of having real social connections with real people. And I do feel that this is a legitimate concern for AI because AI is validating, because AI doesn't really get triggered by you. AI is designed to support you, and therefore whatever worldview that you express to the AI, it's going to validate that worldview, right? So I think that there is a bias, obviously, of the AI of ChatGPT to make you feel comfortable, to emotionally regulate you, and it's actually highly effective at doing so, which is both a pro and a con. So because of this, sometimes it is important to understand that it is possible to become reliant on AI for emotional support, and that this is not a substitute for real human connections. But once again, as a caveat to this, I'm going to point out that parasocial relationships, such as on YouTube or on Instagram, these all also provide digital alternatives to true human connection. And because of this, it's the issue is not solely with AI. The onus is not solely on AI to be taking over our interpersonal relationships. There are many other factors, many other technological influences that are also preventing us from forming true human connections with other people. So if you are using ChatGPT as your quote unquote therapist, you do need to understand that this is a real risk of using AI as your therapist. The last concern that I hear quite often with using ChatGPT as therapy is that many professionals and psychologists, for example, they are expressing concern that ChatGPT is not a substitute for professional help. And what I feel here is that if professional support works for you, then you should absolutely go and seek out that professional help. Honestly, the point of all of this is your well-being and your happiness. So if it's ChatGPT, if it's a therapist, if it's your friend, if it's your grandmother, right? In my view, it doesn't really matter who is providing the support, so long as you are becoming more happy, more embodied, more true to yourself, more fulfilled, right? I went to a number of different professionals, and this was not effective for my well-being in the past. More recently, I've attempted to go to therapy, less so for suicidality, but just like for my everyday emotional shifts. And I still didn't really find it to be effective. And moreover, it's quite pricey. So because of that, this is going to lead me to some of the advantages that I've found of using ChatGPT for therapy. So with these caveats, right? With these caveats of AI is not a substitute for real human beings, these data concerns, as well as whether it could encourage you to harm yourself or whether this is a substitute for professional help. You need to assess these risks for yourself to decide whether this is a good route for you. But on the converse, I'm going to point to some of the advantages of AI that I've found, which I think is very beneficial as far as AI being your quote unquote therapist. And the first is that ChatGPT doesn't sleep. Right? So many people, when they're experiencing major emotional anguish, it's oftentimes late at night, like at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. This is like when a lot of people are going through really difficult things emotionally. And generally, therapists are not open for business at 2 in the morning. And so being able to access support at any time of the day or night that is personalized to you and that moreover can speak to you for any amount of time, right? You know, with therapy, we are limited to like a 1 hour time slot during the work week. And so if you are feeling emotional anguish at 2 a.m. and you need to talk to somebody for 3 hours, then your therapist is not going to be available simply because they're a human and they have a real life that they need to take care of, right? But with ChatGPT, a lot of these time constraints are not really present. You can access it at any time of day or night. You can talk to it about things that you might be embarrassed to talk to with your actual therapist. So a second advantage that I will point out with ChatGPT is that since ChatGPT is not a real human, I at least found that I don't have the same feeling like I need to win this thing over, right? I think that with real people, we often want people to like us. We want people to feel rapport with us. We want to resonate with people. So there's kind of these underlying ulterior social motives that we have when we meet with real people. Whereas, at least in my experience in engaging with ChatGPT, I felt much more fine telling ChatGPT that I thought it was bullshit, that I didn't agree with it, that I liked or disliked what it was saying. And I felt that, at least for me, I didn't feel as much of a pressure to be agreeable as I would with a real human. With a real human, I feel it's more likely that I'm going to filter what I'm going to say. I'm going to tamp down the severity of what I'm experiencing because it's a real human. I don't want to overwhelm them. I'm moderating for the other person's emotional response in the communication, whereas with AI, I'm not moderating for ChatGPT's response. I know that since it doesn't have emotion, since it's not going to be emotionally reactive to the things that I say, I feel that I'm able to communicate with much less of a filter because I'm not using the filter of, is this going to make my relationship with this person okay? Is this going to enrage the other person? Is this going to upset the other person? Am I saying this in a way so that the other person understands? And so because of this, I feel that I have been able to communicate to ChatGPT in a way that is much less filtered, that is much less cognizant of social niceties, of social norms, or what is going to make the other person feel supported and happy, or what is going to make the other person think that I have status, that I'm worthy, that I am worth listening to, right? So these are some of the advantages that I've found of ChatGPT. And then I think the third addition to ChatGPT is that ChatGPT doesn't have as much of a emotional filter on how it's seeing and responding to you. Because the thing about talking to humans is that all humans have emotional triggers. So not only are they listening to the actual information that's coming through your language, they are also responding emotionally to what you're saying. So every single individual has triggers. When you share something with somebody, sometimes what you share with them is going to trigger something in them, which makes them a less clear mirror for what you are looking for support in. It makes them less effective at responding to you in a neutral way, in an objective way. So I found that while ChatGPT has its own biases, ChatGPT does not become emotionally triggered in the way that a lot of humans do. Moreover, ChatGPT is designed to de-escalate your emotions. And so because of this, it will actually respond to you in a way that is matching your emotional context and will actively try to de-escalate you if you are frustrated or infuriated or whatever. And so this is actually, in the case of emotional stuff, very effective in my experience. And one other disadvantage, I would say, to ChatGPT that a lot of people cite is that ChatGPT is inherently biased. ChatGPT is inherently biased and limited by its training material. Right? But I guess as a converse to this, I'm going to point out that any human, any person, any psychiatric professional is also going to be biased based off of their training material, which is what their life experience has been. Any individual is going to have a lived experience, and that lived experience is their training material, right? So my past experiences have provided my training material. Any therapist, any individual is going to have quote unquote training material. And so in truth, there is no individual that you can talk to, including AI, which is not biased, which does not have the biases of their training material, of their own internal algorithms, correct? Because we humans also have default algorithms. We have training material, aka our experiences. So because of this, there is always a bias. If you talk to a therapist, they have a bias. If you talk to an AI, it also has a bias, right? So I think understanding that anything that you talk to, including yourself, also has a bias. And so you need to account for the bias of anything that you interact with as you are getting information from that thing. So now that I've talked about some of the advantages and disadvantages to using ChatGPT as your therapist, now I'm going to discuss what I have done to use ChatGPT as my therapist. And so first of all, I don't really think of it as my therapist. I think of it more as a sounding board for my emotional world. If I am really triggered by something, if I'm going through something that's really upsetting me, then I will often reach for ChatGPT as a tool to help me analyze, process this, move through it in a way that is supportive for me. And I know some people use prompts like, hey, act as my therapist, or hey, in this scenario, if you were a therapist and I was this, then what would you say? I know some people use these kinds of prompting in order to get results from ChatGPT. In the way that I use it, I just literally just tell it what's going on. And so I'll just be like, I'm frustrated about blah, blah, blah. And this is because I had this happen, I had this happen, I had this happen, I had this happen. And because of that, I feel very frustrated. And then I'll just go ahead and have a conversation with ChatGPT about it. So for me, when I use it, it feels a lot more like I'm directly having a conversation with the VAI. I'll just very directly, very straightforwardly say exactly what I'm feeling, exactly what I'm going through. And the AI will typically respond in a way where at least somewhere in the conversation, usually between 5 and 15 minutes into the conversation, I'll have some big aha that shifts my own internal world, that clarifies something for me where I'm like, oh, okay, I see that this way of viewing things was limited, or that this may objectively be happening and that my emotional response is not completely out of line. I have found that the fact that it validates me is a good sanity check. One other advantage of using the AI as your therapist that I think a lot of people don't really discuss is that there is a reality in our world right now, which is that people have empathy fatigue. People have so much going on, and people are, for the most part, so overstimulated that they don't have the room or capacity to deal with any kind of emotional stuff that you're going through. I think that perhaps in the past, we may have had a better capacity to emotionally co-regulate each other. But I think that now, since people have empathy fatigue, it seems to me that people have a lot less room in their emotional space to deal with whatever you might be going through. I think that a lot of heavy psychiatric material as well is stuff that most people are unprepared with how to deal with. A lot of people don't know how to deal with heavy emotional content, and so we just shut it out. We don't want to hear about anything that isn't being happy. We don't want to hear about any of that stuff. So we just cut those people out when they're struggling. And this is a unfortunate truth of our society, even though oftentimes these are the people that need the most support, that need the most compassion, right? And so going back to how I use it, I will ask it questions. I will just stream of conscious, tell it exactly what I'm going through. Stream of consciousness, I'm upset about this, blah, blah, blah. And then if it says something to me that I don't agree with, I'll tell it that I don't agree with it. I'll tell it why I don't agree with it. And then I'll just go back and forth with Chat GPT until I come to some kind of aha moment. And I have found that literally just doing this has been highly effective for me in being able to shift situations. I've also found that using certain prompts such as, what do you feel my blind spots are here? How do you feel that I'm limiting myself in this situation? Is there a different perspective that I'm not considering? Or how would my highest self respond in this situation? These are things that I'll ask it in order to open up new possibilities, new ways of looking at the situation, and see if there are alternatives that the AI comes up with. I don't have a incredible, super special trick or prompt that I use in order to communicate with the AI. I just literally just stream of consciousness, tell it what's going on for me. I've also had it say things to me that I was like, well, I don't resonate with this, right? So there's a bit of both, but for the most part, I have found this to be highly, highly effective and useful. So I've gone over so much in this episode regarding the advantages and disadvantages of using AI as your therapist, how I use it, what the risks are, what to pay attention to. And I know that there is a lot of content in this episode, and I'm really looking forward to your responses on all of this. Thank you so much for liking and following my work. I greatly appreciate you spending the time with me, and I look forward to seeing you next week in the upcoming episode.